So considering how powerful music is in the advertising industry, you'd imagine that there was some sort of legislation governing its use. Well, the Committee for Advertising Practice, or CAP, which is part of the Advertising Standards Agency, is responsible for regulating advertising in this country. It's got two extensive broadcasting codes, one for television and one for radio. They feature stringent guidelines covering all sorts of matters imaginable, including, but not restricted to, denigration, scheduling, children, testimonials, misleading claims, superlative claims, environmental claims, superstitions and appeals to fear, sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, unreasonable discrimination, charity advertising, religion, faith and religious systems of belief, medicines, treatment and health, sanitary protection products, family planning services, firearms, motor vehicles, solicitors and stripograms. But music? No. The closest it comes to a mention is in section 25 of the radio codes. Advertisers must not include sounds likely to create a safety hazard. This refers to things like collision sounds, horns and screeching tyres, and is meant to ensure that drivers listening to the radio don't get confused. There has been a tightening of regulations in recent years, particularly on advertising aimed at children, and some of these have affected the content of those songs used in adverts. For instance, commercials have been banned from trying to encourage pester power on the part of kids. So far so good, you think? The advertising companies now can't use songs to put messages like, "I'd rather have a bowl of that chocolate cereal than a healthy breakfast, Mum," straight into toddlers' heads. We'd rather have a bowl of Cocoa Pops. You thought you hadn't heard that one in a while. Outlawed now under the CAP's Code on Advertising to Children 7.3, Pressure to Purchase. But as always, a tightening in the law has only forced the advertising industry to raise their game. Instead, we now have this subtler and slightly more sinister song as a replacement.
Cocoa Pops and milk make a bowl full of fun.
I wondered whether music was mentioned as part of any of the other codes, maybe under misleading advertising or possibly special effects. There are certainly several comparable techniques banned under the current regulations. For example,
Television Code 5.4.1 Visual Techniques and Special Effects. Advertisements must not use any technique that is likely to give a misleading or unfair impression of the product or service.
This would stop someone from, say,
using glass sheeting to exaggerate the effects of floor polish.
Or how about subliminal advertising?
Television Code 5.4.5 Subliminal Advertising. No advertisement may use images of very brief duration or any other technique which is likely to influence viewers without their being fully aware of what has been done.
Without their being fully aware of what has been done. I contacted the Advertising Standards Authority, or the ASA, about their position on music in advertising. I asked them to what extent they considered music to be of importance or of issue, and whether they would consider music or songs as techniques which are likely to influence viewers without their being fully aware of what has been done. Their response?
We would really only consider music as part of the overall impression given by the ad. I think it's unlikely we would look at music under subliminal messaging unless the complainant had made specific reference to it within their complaint. So really, the extent to which we would consider music used in an ad would depend on the nature of the complaint.
Somewhere, something seems to have gone wrong with music in advertising. It's slipped under the radar of most people's cognition, including those who make the rules. Something doesn't make sense when the same advertising authority that's banned quick cuts and unusual camera angles, etc., to protect children, and TV Code 7.1.2, does nothing about the far more powerful influence of conditioning and association through music and songs. It's called Toys R Us, Toys R Us, Toys R Us. By now, you've heard this jingle 3 times already. But compare this to the exposure an average child receives. Let's use a hypothetical child for this example, and let's call him Robin to make it a bit more personal. Robin is not allowed to watch television during the week, as Robin's parents are worried about their only child's exposure to the corrupting influence of teen dramas, advertising, and the social breakdown of the family unit. But the parents aren't beasts, so they let Robin watch cartoons for a few hours on the weekend, let's say 3 hours on a Saturday morning. Let's say again that there's an average of 3 commercial breaks an hour and that a particularly intensive ad campaign happens to be running on the same day that we're observing Robin watching cartoons. Maybe it's Christmas. In the space of just 3 hours, Robin will have seen the advert 9 times. And bear in mind that the jingle actually occurs 4 times in a single advert. So although having watched only 3 hours of TV a week, compared to an average child's 37, Robin has still heard this slogan a total of 36 times. It's called Toys R Us, Toys R Us, Toys R Us. This is a phenomenal amount of exposure that in any other context would be considered nothing less than blatant conditioning. Is this right? What, if any, are the alternatives? The obvious solution would be more legislation to protect children and ourselves from the endless conditioning of commercial advertising. But the problem would be considering where to draw the line. A limit could feasibly put on how many times an ad could be shown in a certain time span, but then we don't have the hard science to pinpoint exactly when is too much. Who would adjudicate? Would we go as far as banning catchy musical jingles? Would we forbid using already familiar theme tunes known to a viewer to sell a product? And who would decide when a backing track gave inappropriate associations or unrealistic expectations? However, in reality, the likelihood of greater legislation on musical advertising happening anytime soon is very slim. Advertising revenue has rarely been so important to a television economy that's suffering badly, so it would be highly unlikely that broadcasters would be willing to put advertisers in a position where they're effectively working with one hand tied behind their backs. It would leave advertisers bereft of one of their most powerful tools, and condemn us to much quieter, but also probably much less entertaining ad breaks. The ASA's current position is to consider music and advertising in respect to individual complaints, which is probably the only sensible way to continue without an extensive overhaul of the advertising codes. Ultimately, the responsibility has to lie with us, the audience. We should all be more concerned about the endless repetition exploiting the mind's capacity for musical retention, which amounts to brainwashing. If people were more aware of how potent and widespread musical advertising is, then maybe they would begin to complain more about the constant subjection to songs and jingles that stick in the brain. Or maybe they might just stop tuning to commercial broadcasting altogether. Until that day, I leave you with this thought.
It's called Toys R Us.